Introduction to the Daming Bandits. Explosive History New Book. In 1619, during the Battle of Sarhu, after the defeat of Du Song, a group of defeated soldiers fled from Liaodong and entered the Guannei Pass, heading west all the way. Liu Heng, who traveled through time, became an unpredictable bandit. He accidentally defeated his opponent and became the leader of a battalion, training new soldiers, becoming a mountain king, setting up levels, and seizing gentry. He accidentally gained the capital to compete for the world, becoming the most feared opponent of the Jurchen. Chapter 1. People are not ruthless and cannot stand steadily. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The weather in May is already very hot, and after enduring it all day, it only feels cooler in the evening. Liu Heng sat dumbfounded under a big tree, staring straight at the fiery clouds dyed red on the western sky. I've been in this world for 5 days now, and it seems like I can't go back. It's time to accept all of this, Liu Heng murmured to himself. Liu Heng cannot explain the inexplicable things that happened to him. He was originally a librarian of a 21st century library, but inexplicably came to the Ming dynasty and became attached to a bandit who escaped from Liaodong after being defeated in the Battle of Sarhu, becoming a prominent bandit. When possessed, one also obtains memories of the body and roughly understands the identity and environment in which they are located. My predecessor was an honest person with a body that could be called a tiger's back and a bear's waist. Although he could bully others, he was often bullied because he had been honest since childhood. As the sun set in the west, Liu Heng spat out the astringent grass roots in his mouth and stood up from the ground. He patted the soil on his buttocks and walked slowly towards the campsite. Before it was completely dark, there would be food in the camp. Every time Liu Heng tried to order it, he never missed a meal. Nevertheless, the most impressive thing for him during these 5 days was that he had never had a full meal. A familiar person arrived at the rear camp kitchen, surrounded by beggars of bandits. Liu Heng relied on his strong body to squeeze in front of the cook. The cook didn't even look and picked up a palm-sized cake, then handed him a bowl of wild vegetable soup. After Liu Heng took it over, he didn't leave, but said, "We still need a piece of cake." Ordinary bandits only have 1 wild vegetable pancake per meal, while the leader level has 2. Liu Heng's predecessor was an old man who came from Liaodong and served in the border army. With his strong physique, he took on a small leader position. "Just a piece of cake, do you like it or not? Hurry up and get out of here. I don't have time to talk nonsense to you." The cook, relying on himself as the brother of the previous camp leader, bullied Liu Heng's honesty and always gave only 1 piece of cake, so the remaining piece naturally hid on his own. This matter must have been tolerated by Liu Heng's predecessor, who was unwilling to cause trouble. Even before, Liu Heng had not fully accepted the reality of coming to the Ming dynasty, and he was still confused and lazy to argue. But now it's different. Since he has decided to accept everything, what belongs to him should not be taken away by anyone else. His soul is not the honest person who used to be unwilling to cause trouble. In the bandit camp, either you bully me or I bully you. The simplest way to change the image of an honest person in the eyes of others is to stand tall. People are good and are bullied, while horses are good and are ridden. Liu Heng swung his arm and smashed the earthen bowl of wild vegetable soup in his hand on the head of the cook. Pa! The earthenware bowl shattered into several pieces on the chef's head, and wild vegetable soup dripped down his forehead, mixed with a few strands of blood in the middle. The originally noisy bandits fell silent in vain. Liu Heng's hand, which had come down from the sky, grabbed the chef's collar and a piece of broken bowl was pressed against his neck, fiercely saying, "Can you say it again?" The cook was suddenly beaten and blinded by Liu Heng. At this moment, he saw Liu Heng's cold gaze and felt the chill on his neck. His body trembled uncontrollably and stuttered, "Yes, yes. There's still 1 cake missing." "What? Say it again." 2 pieces apart." "I still didn't hear you clearly." Give you another chance to reorganize your language, Liu Heng said as the broken bowl in his hand pierced the skin on the cook's neck, leaving blood flowing down the broken bowl. 3 pieces, 3 cakes. The cook was about to cry, there's really no more. Liu Heng felt almost done and loosened the collar of the cook's clothes, saying, here it is. The cook dared not refuse. His fellow camp leader died in Wangjiazhuang during the attack, and now with no backstage, he was suddenly frightened by Liu Heng's sudden rise in power. After Liu Heng left, the cook Ma Lao lamely looked at the back of the crowd gradually squeezing out, revealing a hint of resentment. Liu Heng, who was facing away from him, naturally did not see it. He held 4 pancakes in his hand, filled a bowl of wild vegetable soup again, and found a sparsely populated place to squat on the ground and eat. Dried pancakes are hard to swallow, and wild vegetable soup is also bitter and difficult to drink, but these can fill the stomach. Liu Heng, who has not eaten enough for several days, swallowed them in large gulps. After eating 2 pancakes and drinking half of a bowl of wild vegetable soup, Liu Heng was about 70.8% full before his eating speed slowed down. Oh, isn't this Liu Demu? As the words fell, Liu Heng's earthenware bowl in front of him was kicked over by someone, and the fragile earthenware bowl shattered into several pieces. The remaining wild vegetable soup in the bowl flowed all over the ground. Liu Heng glanced at the person who kicked down his bowl, his eyes slightly narrowed. He knew that this person's name was Jing Daqiu, and he usually pretended to be a tiger with the former camp leader, often making fun of Liu Heng's predecessor. Liu Heng had never had a favorable impression of this person, and when he saw that he was accompanied by several subordinates, he ignored them. Jing Daqiu didn't want to let go of Liu Heng. He bent down, hooked Liu Heng's chin with his left hand, and patted Liu Heng's face twice with his right hand. He laughed and said, you're angry. Our Liu Damu is angry. A few bandits on the side joined in and laughed heartily. Bang! Just as Jing Daqiu was laughing, Liu Heng took advantage of his unpreparedness and punched Jing Daqiu in the face, flipping him upside down. Take advantage of his illness to take his life. Liu Heng leaped onto Jing Daqiu's body, his fist head falling down like he didn't want any money. The few bandits on the side did not expect that the bullied Liu Damu in their eyes would actually take action first, and they did not react for a moment. When they reacted, they rushed towards Liu Heng with all their hands and feet, trying to rescue Jing Daqiu from under him. But at this moment, Liu Heng held a piece of broken pottery in his hand and pressed it against Jing Daqiu's neck, while the other hand tightly wrapped around Jing Daqiu's arms. Don't move, I'll kill anyone who's moving forward now. Give it all to me, I must kill him today. Jing Daqiu, who finally had the opportunity to speak, shouted frantically. He has always bullied Liu Heng, but this time he was beaten by Liu Heng, whom he looked down upon. This made him feel resentful and only wanted to kill Liu Heng to relieve his hatred. Shut up, if you talk again, I'll kill you now. Liu Heng said fiercely, pushing the broken pottery in his hand against Jing Daqiu's neck, piercing the skin and bleeding out. The piercing pain in his neck and the coldness of the ceramic pieces made Jing Daqiu sober up, only to realize that he had been kidnapped by Liu Heng. Thinking of this, Jing Daqiu's legs suddenly softened and he stuttered, "You, don't act recklessly. They won't let you go if you kill me." After listening, Liu Heng sneered. Such a threat is pale and powerless, and he doesn't even take it seriously. Liu Tu, I'm here. As the words fell, a bandit holding a wooden spear approached Liu Heng. Stand behind me, Liu Heng said to the bandit. Liu Heng knew that this person's name was Yang Yuan, and he was also the only subordinate under his command who was willing to obey him. Dada, dada. A sudden sound of hooves came and the sound became closer and closer. What are you all doing around here? Scatter. The sound of hooves stopped, and a rough and wild voice came over. Liu Heng glanced sideways with residual light. The person is riding on the back of a horse, wearing an iron helmet and double-breasted cotton armor. Chapter 2. Sudden Opportunities. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ma Tu Ling, help me, help me. Zheng Deqiu saw the person on the horse's back and quickly shouted for help. Ma Yunjiu, who was riding on his horse, glanced at him and asked coldly, "What's going on?" Without waiting for Liu Heng to speak, Zheng Deqiu said with a worried expression, "He wants to kill me. Ma Tu Ling, hurry up and save me." Ma Yunjiu, an old man from Liaodong, naturally recognized Liu Heng and said, "Brother Liu Heng, what are you doing? You are all your own brothers. Why bother making such a scene? I think it's better to let the people go first, and there is still waiting for him to be summoned at the stone cabinet." Upon seeing Ma Yunjiu's arrival, Liu Heng knew that his conflict with Zheng Deqiu had come to an end for the time being. Ma Yunjiu would never watch him move Zheng Deqiu, especially when the last sentence about the stone cabinet being summoned was a warning to him. "Since Brother Ma spoke up, I must give this face, go away." Liu Hengshuan stepped down the donkey and pushed Zheng Deqiu out of his arms. Zheng Deqiu stumbled a few steps and fell forward, but was promptly supported by two bandits. As soon as Zheng Deqiu stood firm, his face immediately changed. He raised his hand and pointed at Liu Heng, saying to the several bandits around him, "Go ahead, catch him for me. I must kill him today. That's enough." Ma Yunjiu's face darkened and he said coldly, "This has delayed the matter of the stone cabinet. You don't have enough heads to chop. Come with me to see the stone cabinet immediately." After saying these words, Ma Yunjiu turned his horse's head and urged it to walk out. Seeing this, Zheng Deqiu glared fiercely at Liu Heng and said, "When I come back, we can't finish this matter." After speaking, he left the rear camp with a few of his own bandit subordinates in a fit of anger. "So those rumors are all true," Yang Yuan muttered to himself as he looked towards the direction where Ma Yunjiu and Zheng Deqiu had disappeared. "What's really fake?" Liu Heng asked when he heard it. Yang Yuan said, "Previously, I heard people in the camp privately say that Zheng Deqiu was valued by Sherdashan and wanted to become the leader of our rear camp. Now even the horse leaders around Sherdashan are personally looking for Zheng Deqiu. It seems that this matter is very likely true." Upon hearing this news for the first time, Liu Heng's expression paused. He didn't expect such a big event to happen to him in a daze these past few days. In his memory, there were only 5 battalions in the entire army of bandits. Apart from Sherdashan's own central military camp, there were also 4 battalions and 4 battalion leaders, each of whom was in charge of the troops and horses of this battalion, making him one of the most prestigious members of the bandit army. If Zheng Deqiu became the head of the rear camp, it would not be good news for Liu Heng, especially since the two sides had just started a conflict. "Liu Tu, if Zheng Deqiu really becomes our camp leader, he may use any sinister means against you in the future," Yang Yuan said worriedly. "I think we should avoid it for now." "Where can we avoid?" Liu Heng frowned. He knew that Yang Yuan was right. There were no laws in the bandit army. As long as Zheng Deqiu led people to catch him, he would be like fish and meat on the chopping board. The other party could rectify him as they wanted. "The leader of the archer camp, Liaodong, is your fellow townsman, Liu Tu," Yang Yuan said. "As long as we hide in the archer camp, even if Zheng Deqiu becomes the leader of the rear camp, he will have no choice but to have you, Liu Tu." Upon Yang Yuan's reminder, Liu Heng remembered that there were also 2 fellow townsmen in the archer camp, one of whom was a small leader like him, and the other was even more impressive, being the leader in charge of a camp. With these 2 people guarding him, even if Zheng Deqiu became the head of the rear camp, he would not dare to go to the archer camp to arrest people. Then he could escape from this tributary of bandits and flee south to Macau. Even if his braids were to dominate the Central Plains in the future, it would not endanger his safety. If not, he could still escape overseas. Thinking of this, Liu Heng said, "Let's go to the archer camp." Yang Yuan took his wooden spear and left the rear camp with Liu Heng. The archer camp was located on the left flank of the bandit army, less than 2 miles away from the rear camp. Before it was completely dark, Liu Heng and Yang Yuan arrived at the archer camp. Along the way, he and Yang Yuan arrived unobstructed at the large tent of the archer camp. Before they could enter the large tent, they saw that someone had opened it from inside and was about to step out. Second brother. Liu Heng instinctively shouted when he saw the face of the person who was about to leave the camp. The person saw Liu Heng with a happy expression on their face. They took a few steps closer and wrapped their hands around Liu Heng's shoulders, laughing and saying, it's just the right time to come. Brother Shuheng is asking me to go to the back camp to find you. Come with me quickly. Liu Heng was forcibly dragged into the big tent. Brother Shuheng, our little brother Liu Heng is here, Chen Xuanping shouted in a rough and wild voice. It seems that our little brother smelled the aroma ahead of time and arrived by himself. Li Shuheng laughed and welcomed him from behind the table. Liu Heng only then noticed that there was a wooden basin placed on the low table in the big tent, which contained some dark things. The fragrance of meat continuously drifted into his nostrils from inside. Liu Heng, who had not seen any meat for a long time, couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Seeing this, Li Shuheng smiled and said, "Stop standing, these are all reserved for you. Sit down and eat now." Chen Xuanping beside him also said, "Recently, there has been a shortage of food in all the camps. During the day, I left the camp with my archers to hunt. I didn't expect my luck to be so good. In less than half a day, I hunted a wild boar. Tonight, it can be said that my brothers in the camp started meat." Liu Heng didn't hesitate either. He sat behind the low table and gave Yang Yuan some, then grabbed a rib and started nibbling on it. After eating 3 pieces in a row, Yu finally put down the bone in his hand and said, "Brother Shuheng, when I came, second brother said he was going to find me. What's up?" Li Shuheng nodded slightly and said, "There is indeed something I need you to nod." "What's up?" Liu Heng licked the oil stains on his fingers, feeling for the first time that pork could be so delicious. Li Shuheng said, "Since the Battle of Wangjiazwang, when your rear camp leader died in battle, this position has been vacant, and this vacancy will last for only half a month. I plan to let you compete for this position." Liu Heng's face showed a hint of confusion and he said, "I heard that the candidate has been determined and will be succeeded by another small leader in the rear camp, Zheng Deqiu." Before coming, Zheng Deqiu had just been taken away by the horse head tie next to Sherdashan. It was originally settled, Li Shuheng said, but neither of the 2 battalion leaders from the left and right camps agreed that Zheng Deqiu would take over the rear camp, so the matter dragged on again. Liu Heng exclaimed curiously, "Are there any other candidates for the left and right camps? I remember that in order to prevent each camp from annexing each other, a rule was made that each camp leader could only choose a suitable person from their own camp to take over. The person they elected is also a small leader in the rear camp," said Li Shuheng, with a strange look at Liu Heng. "What does that mean?" Liu Heng raised his finger and pointed to himself, "It can't be me, can it?" Li Shuheng nodded and said, "That's right, the person they elected is you." "How could it be? I'm not familiar with them at all. If we had to choose, we would have to choose the people they've won over ourselves." Liu Heng frowned. In his predecessor's memory, the 2 battalion leaders he had the least contact with were the left and right battalion leaders. "Anyway, it's a good thing," Li Shuheng said. "I hope you can compete for the position of this camp leader." Liu Heng furrowed his brow, lost in thought. Chapter 3. Escalation of Contradictions. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In this chaotic era, Liu Heng had already given up his life and only wanted to find a suitable opportunity to leave this tributary of bandits and find a way to escape to Macau. In the future, even if the Ming dynasty was ruled by foreign tribes, he could still protect himself. Moreover, with his understanding of the historical direction for the next few hundred years, he may not be unable to embark on a career. But now he is extremely unwilling to be the head of the rear camp. No one in this era knows better than him the tragic world of the next few decades, followed by more than 200 years of servile rule. He, who was familiar with the history of the late Ming dynasty, was well aware that the bandits during the Guannei period had no future. Only in the Chongzhen dynasty did they have a brief glory, and before they could taste the fruits of victory, they became servants of other families. After Liu Heng remained silent for a long time, Li Shuheng said, "I don't know what you're worried about, but now the world is chaotic, and only the stronger the power in our hands, the safer we will be." Upon hearing these words, Liu Heng was surprised and realized that he had misunderstood. "I only wanted to escape to Macau, but forgot that it was during the Guannei period of the Ming dynasty. Unlike a few hundred years later, a plane ticket could take a few hours to get to Macau. Now, if I want to rush from the north of the Ming dynasty to Macau, it will not be much easier, not to mention going through 90.9 or 80.1 difficulties. You should know that in these days, a typhoid cold can take a person's life." Chen Xuanping on the side said, "What's there to hesitate about? If you become the head of the rear camp, we will have 2 battalions in hand. At that time, we can be like the left and right camps, even Shi Yunhu will be afraid of us." After hesitating for a moment, Liu Heng decided to temporarily let go of the unrealistic idea of going to Macau. It would be more realistic to compete for the position of the rear camp headquarters. With this position to protect him, at least he would be safe before the Ming army's encirclement. "The decision has been made," and he said, "Brother Shuheng, can you explain in detail how I should compete for the position of the rear camp leader?" Seeing Liu Heng's agreement, Li Shuheng smiled and said, "Don't worry, the competition between you and Jing Daqiu is very simple. Now that the army is short of food, Shi Yunhu and several of our battalion leaders have jointly discussed and decided that you and Jing Daqiu will be the leaders of the rear camp within 10 days. Whoever brings in more food will be the leader of the rear camp. When will it start?" Liu Heng asked. Since he wanted to argue, he naturally had to figure it out thoroughly before making a plan. Li Shuheng said, "Tomorrow is considered the first day." Liu Heng glanced at Li Shuheng and noticed that his gaze was dodging. He immediately understood that Li Shuheng was probably using his banner to handle the battle for the head of the rear camp for him. Liu Heng did not show any dissatisfaction with Li Shuheng's unauthorized decision-making, which was already a good thing. If it were anyone else, they would agree first. Since Liu Heng decided to compete for the position of the rear camp leader, he became serious and considered how to obtain food, as food would not fall from the sky on its own. After pondering for a while, he came up with an idea that was most suitable for him who didn't have much strength yet. He said, "Brother Shuheng, tomorrow you can send some people to investigate around. Which village is the wealthiest and which village's head treats tenants the most harshly?" Li Shuheng replied, "This is easy. Tomorrow, I will send scouts out to investigate. But what are we doing to inquire about this? Why don't we find a small village to plunder it? With these people from the archer camp, we'll have enough." Liu Heng shook his head slightly and said, "Jing Daqiu has the support of the central military camp in Shida cabinet. There must be more people and horses that can be mobilized than us. If we attack Xiaozhuang, even if we get some food, it will be difficult to surpass Jing Daqiu. We can only take risks and try our best to attack some big Zhuangzi." "No, absolutely no, it's too dangerous," Li Shuheng shook his head and refused. "The military defense of the Zhuangzi is much stronger than that of Xiaozhuangzi. You forgot the lesson from the last attack on Wangjiazwang." Liu Heng certainly remembers that the Battle of Wangjiazwang was their first disastrous defeat as a group of bandits. One battalion leader was killed in that battle, and it was precisely because of that disastrous defeat that the position of Shi Yunhu's large cabinet was questioned. The various battalions began to become unstable. The first ones to express their dissatisfaction were the left battalion leader Wu Blind and the right battalion leader Zhou Blackface. "Don't worry, I have my own way." After hesitating for a moment, Liu Heng repeated his idea and told them to keep it confidential. After pondering for a moment, Li Shuheng said, "Just do as you say. Both Xuanping and I will cooperate with you, but you must be careful and be careful. Only the three of us who came out from the same fortress were left. Liu Heng nodded heavily. After finishing the meet and discussing the matter, Liu Heng decided to return to the back camp overnight. Only by returning to the back camp can it be convenient to attract the bandits from the back camp. In his plan, there were still fewer people and horses relying solely on the archer camp, and there was a temporary shortage of camp leaders in the rear camp, which was convenient for him to attract a few small leaders and ordinary bandits in the camp. Returning to the rear camp, when Liu Heng and Yang Yuan passed by the large tent at the head of the rear camp, he found that the tent curtain had been lifted and rolled up. Seeing this, Liu Heng slowed down and finally stopped in front of the big tent. Yang Yuan, who had not noticed, almost ran into him. "Liu Tu, what's wrong?" Yang Yuan saw Liu Heng stop and said in confusion. Liu Heng raised his hand and pointed to the tent in front of him, saying, "Let's sleep here tonight." Yang Yuan's face showed shock, and Yu read a book at www.yuukangshu.net, saying, "This is the big tent of the camp leader, and we don't have the qualifications to live in it. What are you afraid of?" Liu Heng curled his mouth slightly upwards and said, "Now that the camp leader is dead, I am competing for this position again. Moving in here is to show others that if they can live in the camp leader's tent and sit in the back camp leader, not only Jingdekyu but also me." There was one more thing he didn't explain to Yang Yuan. In the past, he was too honest, and the vast majority of the bandits in the rear camp looked down on him. Although he cleaned up his cook Ma Lao's limp yesterday and had another fight with Jingdekyu, the time was too short, and the impression of an honest person in others' minds was not easy to eliminate. Moving into the tent at the head of the camp also further changed the fixed image of an honest person in the other camp members. At the same time, it also indicates the attitude of competing for the head of the rear camp. The large tent at the head of the camp is much stronger than the place where ordinary bandits sleep. Inside the tent, there is a wooden bed made of wooden boards, covered with animal skin blankets. Unlike ordinary bandits, they can only sleep on hay. The blanket on the bed was torn off by Liu Heng and thrown to Yang Yuan, who lay directly on the wooden board. Slowly, both of them fell asleep. After an unknown amount of time, Liu Heng felt something kicking him in a daze. He lazily opened his eyes, only to see Jingdekyu staring at him with a cold smile on his face. Liu Heng suddenly sat up. At this point, it was already daylight outside. "Huh, before coming, I was afraid you would run to the archer camp. I didn't expect you to be brave enough to stay in the back camp." Jingdekyu sneered and pulled out the knife in his hand, pointing it at Liu Heng. Faced with the dazzling tip of the knife, Liu Heng's heart trembled, and his cold hair stood up one by one, sweeping away any remaining drowsiness. "Saying you're not afraid, that's fake. If anyone were to be pointed at by a knife just after waking up, they would be in a cold sweat." Chapter 4. Heaven does not follow people's wishes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing the murderous intent in Jingdekyu's eyes, Liu Hengxian raised his throat. "Are you going to kill me?" Liu Hengxian suppressed his fear and said, "Don't forget, you're not the leader of the camp yet, just a small leader like me. You are also worthy of being compared to me." Jingdekyu sneered, "I have the support of the stone cabinet behind me. You also want to compete with me for the rear camp. If you kill me today, I will be the head of the rear camp. I see who dares to compete with me in the future." Liu Heng knew that if there were no accidents, he would be doomed this time. In addition to Jingdekyu, there are also 5 bandits inside the tent. 2 of them subdued Yang Yuan, while the other 3 blocked the tent door. The conflict inside the tent attracted the attention of the bandits near the big tent, who gathered outside the tent door one after another, and gradually gathered several circles of bandits in front of the tent door. These converging bandits all stood outside the tent, watching as onlookers inside. Even the other small leaders of the rear camp were the same, and no one intervened in the struggle between the 2 sides. Liu Heng's heart sank. He didn't expect Jingdekyu to be so bold and daring to come and kill him in front of everyone. "Jingdekyu, there is an archer camp behind me. If you kill me, you won't be afraid that the archer camp will come to you for justice. At this moment, Liu Heng could only hope that the archer camp could make the other party wary. Don't scare me, Zheng Deqiu sneered. When I sit at the head of the rear camp and have a large stone cabinet behind me, do you think I will still be afraid of Li Shuheng from the archer camp? Liu Heng bit his lips secretly and thought to himself, afraid that he would be the first traveler to be killed after only staying for such a short time. He also didn't know if he could still travel back after death and continue to be his librarian. Zheng Deqiu sneered and said, I originally wanted you to live for 2 more days. After I secured my position as the head of the camp, I would find a way to kill you. But I didn't expect you to compete with me for the head of the rear camp, and even won't let you stay. Remember, don't blame me after you die. If you blame me, you shouldn't offend me. Fight with me for the head of the rear camp. At this point, Zheng Deqiu raised his knife with both hands and raised it high. Upon seeing this, there was a commotion outside the account. At this moment, someone said coldly, Zheng Deqiu, if you dare to drop your knife, I guarantee you won't live for a moment. Who the hell is threatening me? I don't want to live anymore. Zheng Deqiu stopped swinging his arm and turned his head with an angry expression to look behind him. Just took a glance, his face changed in vain, and he was about to cut down with a knife in his hand. Don't move, Chen Xuanping said coldly. Move my arrow again and it will shoot out immediately. If you don't believe it, you can give it a try and see if it's your knife or my arrow. Zheng Deqiu's sword remained in mid-air, and his face turned ugly as he said, Chen Xuanping, this is the matter of our rear camp. It's not your turn to manage the archer camp. The affairs of the rear camp really don't fall under the control of our archer's camp, Chen Xuanping said coldly, but the person you want to kill is my brother, so it's none of my business. Zheng Deqiu said with a gloomy face, so your archer camp is going to intervene in our rear camp. Pooh, what kind of thing are you? You really think you can represent the rear camp, Chen Xuanping said without hesitation. Zheng Deqiu's face was gloomy, and he glanced at Liu Heng. With a final grit of his teeth, he said, okay, you're lucky. Let's go. Before leaving, Zheng Deqiu gave Chen Xuanping a fierce glare before leaving the camp. When Zheng Deqiu's figure completely disappeared, Liu Heng let out a long sigh and realized that his back was wet in a large area. As soon as the cool breeze passed, it became a shade. Is everything okay? Chen Xuanping quickly approached Liu Heng. Fortunately, I came in time. It was too dangerous just now. Liu Heng squeezed out a smile and said, fortunately, you arrived in time. If you come a little later, I'm afraid Yang Yuan will have to wet his pants. Yang Yuan rolled his eyes when he heard this, but he did feel a wave of fear in his heart. Liu Heng said again, why didn't Zheng Deqiu and the others stay just now? Since they have already torn their faces apart, it's better to take the opportunity to kill him to prevent future troubles. The White Lotus of the Virgin Mary cannot be taken seriously. Since Zheng Deqiu is already going to kill him, if given the opportunity, Liu Heng will naturally not let Zheng Deqiu go. Chen Xuanping shook his head and said, Zheng Deqiu was chosen by Shi Yunhu as the rear camp leader. It's not easy to move him, and the situation was critical just now. The distance between you and Zheng Deqiu was too close. Although I can shoot him, if he's still alive, it's very likely that he'll take you along on the road. After saying a few words, Liu Heng felt much calmer in his heart, at least his legs no longer trembling, and he stood up from the bedboard. By the way, the things you asked me to prepare are already ready, right outside the tent, Chen Xuanping said as he turned his hand and pointed to the outside of the tent. Liu Heng's gaze followed and he saw several archers standing outside the tent, with several large baskets at their feet covered with cloth. The exposed areas clearly showed cakes. Thank you, second brother. Liu Heng understood that if Chen Xuanping could gather so many cakes and bring them over in the morning, he must have been busy for most of the night. There's no need to say these things between you and my brothers, Chen Xuanping said. Since Jingdekyu has already torn his face with you, if he doesn't succeed this time, there will definitely be another time. You need more people around you to protect us. This time, the people I brought from the archer camp will temporarily follow you. Liu Heng smiled and said, since the death of the head of the rear camp, there has been a continuous shortage of food. Normally, the brothers in the camp can only eat half full. Second brother, bringing so many cakes is enough for most of the people in the rear camp to be bought by me. Then Jingdekyu will have no more opportunities like today. That's good, Chen Xuanping said. Even if half of the people in the rear camp can listen to you, Jingdekyu won't have the chance to touch you. Liu Heng nodded and immediately said to Yang Yuan, taking advantage of the fact that most of the people in the rear camp are outside the camp tent, go tell them that anyone who is willing to follow me will not let my brothers go hungry again. Everyone has pancakes to eat. Remember to pull off the cloth on the basket and show them that we don't lack food. Okay. I'll go right away, Yang Yuan agreed and turned to walk outside the camp tent. Originally, Liu Heng knew it was most appropriate for him to personally intervene in this matter, but now his legs are still a bit weak and he is worried that he may show timidity in front of everyone. Not long after, Yang Yuan walked back with a dark face. What's wrong? Liu Heng's heart sank and he realized there was a problem. Liu too, it's probably difficult to attract those people from the rear camp. It shouldn't be. Liu Heng frowned. Yang Yuan said with a bitter face, those people believe that the leader of the rear camp will be Jingdekyu. They are afraid that if you follow Liu, you will be liquidated by Jingdekyu in the future. Liu Heng fell and sat on the bedboard, not expecting such a result after a hard work. All his plans to compete for the head of the rear camp require enough people to be put into action. Now, without the support of the rear camp, relying solely on the 100 or so members of the archer camp is far from what he expected, and there is simply not enough manpower. Chapter 5. Grabbing the Grains of the Old Man with a Lament. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Liu Heng looked disappointed, everything was too simple for him to think. As he had anticipated before, by bribing the people from the rear camp and seeking support from the left and right camps, his plan could proceed. But reality dealt him a heavy blow, making him understand that seeking good fortune and avoiding harm are human instincts. Even the people in the rear camp know how to stand at this time, let alone the left and right camps who have no relationship with him. Chen Xuanping beside him said, why don't we follow what I said before and have the archer camp come forward and sweep through a few small villages? We can still get some food. It's useless. Liu Heng waved his hand and said, with the support of Shi Yunhu, Jingdekyu will definitely take action against those villages and plunder such things. We are far inferior to Shi Yunhu's Chinese military camp. Among the bandits, the horse bandits are the most terrifying. Liu Heng knew that the only horse caravan in their army of bandits was in the central military camp, under the jurisdiction of Ma Yunjiu, the commander of the central military camp's guard. When it comes to looting, the archer camp is ultimately inferior to the Chinese military camp with a cavalry. Actually, I have a solution to the manpower problem, Yang Yuan hesitated and said. What's the solution? Liu Heng and Chen Xuanping's gaze was fixed on Yang Yuan. Yang Yuan said, in addition to the 5 major camps, we also have an outer camp. Although the refugees inside the outer camp are all kidnapped, their foundation is not inferior to that of the bandits in several major camps. It's just that there isn't much food in the camp, so it doesn't belong to each camp. If we can provide some food, the refugees outside the camp will definitely be willing to sacrifice their lives for us. Good idea. Liu Heng's eyes lit up and he excitedly patted himself off the bedboard. The mountains and rivers are heavy, and there is no way out. The willows are dark and the flowers are bright, creating another village. He almost forgot that the largest number of people were not the 5 camps, but the refugee camps that came with them. Chen Xuanping said with concern, but we don't have much food either. There are at least thousands of refugees outside the camp. With the little food we have, we can't support so many people. Yang Yuan said again, we don't need to recruit all of them, we only need to recruit a portion of the refugees, and the consumption of food will naturally not be that large. That's right, Liu Heng turned to look at Chen Xuanping and said, second brother, thank you for your hard work. You and Yang Yuan will go to the outer camp, recruit 300 refugees first, and arrange for them to be placed on the empty land outside the archer camp. But what about food? The food for 300 people cannot be solved by the archer camp alone. Chen Sun looked worried on the surface. I know a person should hide some food in their hands, Liu Heng said. I also need my second brother to leave me a few people to transport the food. Chen Xuanping hesitated for a moment and said, since you have a way to get food, I won't say much about anything else. Time is tight, so I will go to the outer camp to gather the people you need and leave 4 archers to be assigned by you. Subsequently, Chen Xuanping and Yang Yuan left the camp with several archers, while also taking away the baskets containing pancakes. Liu Heng took the remaining members of the archer camp to the kitchen in the rear camp. At this time, the kitchen was busy preparing breakfast, and the only cook was Ma Laojiao, who needed to make pancakes and cook wild vegetable soup. Usually, he started working before dawn. As soon as he entered the kitchen, Liu Heng waved his arm and pointed at Ma Laoming, saying, get him up for me. As the words fell, 2 members of the archer camp walked up. One of them held onto Ma Lao's arm and pressed him directly onto a dilapidated wooden table. Liu Tu, what does this mean? I gave you all the pancakes from yesterday, said Ma Lao with a look of fear as he struggled to look up. Liu Heng stood in front of Ma Lao's lame line of sight and asked, stop talking nonsense. I'll ask you, where did you hide all the food? Injustice. Injustice, all the food was brought back by the Central Army camp, and I have never hidden any food. Ma Laoming shouted out in a loud voice. It's true that you don't shed tears until you see the coffin, Liu Heng said coldly. Cut off his left hand, or if you don't say anything, then cut off his right hand. Among the bandits in the rear camp, there are not many people who do not know that Ma Laojiao is secretly hiding food. However, in the past, Ma Laojiao's clan brother was the head of the rear camp, and everyone pretended not to know that he was hiding food. Now that Liu Heng lacks food to raise refugees, he naturally focuses on the food hidden by Ma Laoming. Among the several bandits brought by Liu Heng, one of them pressed Ma Lao's left hand on the table, while the other pulled out his knife and raised it, ready to chop it off. The struggling old horse with a limp I couldn't break free and quickly shouted, don't chop, I say everything. Liu Heng waved his hand and gestured for the person holding the knife to wait for a moment, then asked, where is the grain hidden? If you dare to deceive me, you don't need both of your hands. Having lost one leg, he naturally didn't want to lose both hands. Ma Lao limped and said dejectedly, those grains are all hidden in the place where I sleep. Let's go, take us over. Liu Hengqiao gave a glance to the person who restrained Ma Lao's limp. Ma Lao lamely lowered his head to lead the way, and a group of people came to the thatched hut next to the kitchen. Everything is behind those chopping sticks. Ma Lao's limp hand was restrained and couldn't move, so he could only raise his chin and nod inside the thatched hut. A person from the archer camp walked in, lifted the thatch and some firewood on top, and found 5 grain bags neatly stacked behind these things. The archers from the camp used a knife to cut through one of the pockets, and the food inside instantly flowed out. Ma Lao Ji, you can do it. These bags of grain are probably over 2 stones. Liu Heng walked over and picked up one of the pockets with his hand, which weighed at least 100 pounds. Find a big cart and take it all away, Liu Heng instructed a person from the archer camp, and then said again, let him go. Upon hearing this, Ma Lao's limp face turned bitter and he said, Liu Tu, can you leave some for me? Liu Heng frowned and said, isn't there food distributed every day in the central military camp? I've taken all of this food with me. No, it's not. Ma Lao lamely rubbed his hands and said, isn't the head of our rear camp going to be replaced? I want to use these grains to buy some peace. Yu reading www.uukangshu.net. Liu Heng looked up and down at Ma Lao's limp for a while before saying, "All right, I'll take the grain. I'll keep you safe when I come back." Ma Lao's tone choked and he immediately said with a bitter face, "Don't joke, Liu Tu. I heard that the head of the rear camp will be Zhengdekyu. That was before, from now on it will be me." Liu Heng turned his head and said to the people from the nearby archer camp, "Come, let's carry the grain out together and get on the cart." Ma Laoji dared not stop him and chased after Liu Heng's buttocks, saying, "Liu Tu, this matter is not a joke. The stone cabinet of the central military camp has spoken up, and Zhengdekyu will be the head of the rear camp. Who dares to oppose the stone cabinet's words? So Liu Tu, look at this grain." Putting down the grain bag in his hand, Liu Heng's face sank and he said coldly, "Do you want to chatter and believe it or not? I'll have someone chop you now." Ma Lao lamely closed his mouth, not expecting that the once honest and easy to bully Liu Damu would now be so angry. Of course, there are also those guys from the archer camp who hold sharp blades and are not easy to deal with at first glance. Bags of grain were loaded onto the cart, with livestock attached. A bowman from the archer camp drove the cart slowly away from the rear camp. Ma Lao looked at Liu Heng and others who had left with a look of resentment on his face. There were many bandits from the rear camp nearby who saw Liu Heng and his team carrying food from Ma Lao Ming, but no one dared to ask. Nowadays, the rear camp no longer has a leader, and most of the bandits in the rear camp cling to the belief that having more is better than having less. Moreover, those grains are all privately stored by Ma Lao Ming, and even without them, they will not go hungry. The central military camp still sends a batch of grains to the rear camp every day. After leaving the rear camp, Liu Heng followed the cart towards the archer camp. At this moment, a bandit from the archer camp ran towards him panting heavily. Chapter 6. Training of Refugees. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What happened? As the archer camp bandits approached, Liu Heng instinctively asked. The bandit from the archer camp replied, "Chen Tu asked for a message, saying that the person has been taken to the open space near the archer camp, and will wait for you, Liu Tu." "Okay, I'll go over now," Liu Heng said with a smile on his face, turning his head to the bandit driving the cart. "I'll go with him first, and you can send the food back to the archer's camp and settle down. Arrange a grain transport truck to enter the camp on his own, and Liu Heng lead several bandits straight to the other side." Before approaching, Liu Heng saw several hundred people in groups of 3 or 5 gathered under the shade of trees ahead. "Second brother, there must be 200 or 300 people here, right?" Liu Heng said with a happy expression as he approached Qin Xuanping. Qin Xuanping smiled and said, "Fortunately, we didn't live up to our fate. Yang Yuan and I selected 300 people from the refugee camp to bring over. If it's not enough, it won't be a problem to recruit another few hundred people from the camp." That's enough," Liu Heng smiled. "If this thing is done this time, second brother, you have made a big contribution." Qin Xuanping said with a slight worry on his face, "With so many mouths popping up all at once, food is a big problem. Currently, there is a shortage of food in various camps, and we can't sustain so many people for long." Liu Hengdao said, "I have brought more than 2 stones of grain from the rear camp, mixed with some wild vegetables, to feed these people in front of me for a few days. Brother Shuheng can help me with another portion of the grain, which will be enough for these people to eat for 10 days. I will handle the remaining grain." "It's easy to say where Brother Shuheng is from," Qin Xuanping said. "When recruiting these refugees, I met with Brother Shuheng and talked about your recruitment of refugees. Brother Shuheng promised to prepare 10 stones of grain for you." Liu Hengshi said, "That's great. With these grains, it's enough to train these refugees." Qin Xuanping said again, "Brother Shuheng and I have only helped you so much. In the future, you can only rely on yourself to solve the food problem." "I understand, I will find a way to get the food," Liu Hengshuan said to Yang Yuan again. Bring a few people and divide these refugees into 30 teams, with each team consisting of 10 people, arranged vertically. Yang Yuan responded and led people to drive away the refugees who were enjoying the shade under the trees, starting to form a team for them. After tinkering for a while, they finally managed to divide these refugees into teams, barely giving them a somewhat neat appearance. After completing all of this, Liu Heng stepped forward to the front of these refugee teams and loudly said, "Have you seen these cakes?" As he spoke, he pointed to the baskets of cookies that Chen Xuanping had brought earlier. The refugees standing in the front two rows can see the pancakes inside the basket with their heads down, while the refugees in the back row want to see clearly and squeeze forward one after another. The originally organized team is now in disarray again. Fortunately, the archers brought by Chen Xuanping were all wielding sharp blades, which made these refugees afraid to act too recklessly. At most, they stretched their necks to look forward, and only a few people squeezed in front of them. Whatever is chaotic, stand still. Don't blame me for being rude when anyone is squeezing around. Chen Xuanping drew his waist knife and showed a fierce expression. The bandits from the nearby archer camp also showed a fierce expression, with weapons in their hands threatening the refugees. When the refugee team became more stable, Liu Heng said coldly, "Don't worry, the pancakes are all prepared for you. From now on, I will have people bring the prepared pancakes every day. But if you eat my pancakes, you will be my subordinates. You must follow my orders. If not, don't blame me for cutting off the ones who eat with you." Hundreds of refugees began to stir, whispering incessantly inside. They are all refugees who have been kidnapped, barely considered as members of the bandit army, but their status is low. They usually only have wild vegetable soup to drink, which is difficult to eat. Only by entering various camps and becoming bandits can they barely eat pancakes and eat half full. For them, being selected to enter the main camp is the most anticipated thing. Quiet, quiet. As Liu Heng pressed his hand, Yang Yuan led people to suppress several disobedient refugees, causing the refugee team to quiet down again. Liu Heng exclaimed loudly, "Now you 300 people have been divided into 30 small teams. From now on, the person standing at the front of each team is the military commander. Now, all the military commanders, like me, roll up their left leg pants." Speaking, Liu Heng bent down and rolled up the leg of his left leg, all the way up to his knee. The reason why he rolled up his left leg of his pants was because he was worried that some of these refugees would have difficulty training because some of them were left and right. Now, he only has 10 days and doesn't have much time to train these refugees. Standing in the front row of the refugees, 30 newly appointed military commanders obediently rolled up their pants legs. After these people were ready, Liu Heng continued, "Now all the officers, go manage your subordinates in the team, roll up your left leg and pants, and the rest of you stand still." Chen Xuanping suddenly interjected, "That's a good idea. In this way, each sergeant only manages 10 people, and the team is not easily chaotic. All you need to do is manage these dozens of sergeants well." As these platoon leaders arranged for the remaining refugees to roll up their left leg pants, the refugee team was somewhat scattered. Fortunately, with the constraints of their respective team leaders, the gathered refugee team did not become chaotic as a result. After about a quarter of an hour, all the sergeants rolled up the left leg of the refugees in their ranks and stood back at the front of the line. Liu Heng stood in front of these people and shouted loudly, "Starting from today, I will teach you 2 movements. One is called standing at attention, and the other is called kicking the main step. Those who fail to do well within 10 days will be whipped 30 times each. Those who intentionally cause trouble will be beheaded." When it came to the final slash, Liu Heng made a heavy strike with his right hand in mid-air. As his arm fell, many of the 30 newly appointed military commanders shrank their necks. Even as summer was approaching, Yu felt a chill rising from behind their necks. Standing at attention means standing in place without saying a word or moving. If you can hold on for half an hour, you are considered qualified. Liu Heng said as he clasped his 5 fingers together, creating a standard military posture for future generations. He has participated in 2 military training sessions in high school and university, and his military posture is familiar to him. Now every sergeant is like me, standing at attention, Liu Heng shouted to the top 30 sergeants with a straight figure. 30 military commanders looked at Liu Heng's appearance and learned to make the same posture as Liu Heng, but after gesturing for a while, they reluctantly made a gesture, completely unable to achieve Liu Heng's javelin-like appearance. However, Liu Heng was not in a hurry. He pointed out to these officers one by one and did not require them to meet any standards, as long as they were about the same. After about half an hour, we finally corrected the postures of these sergeants quite well, so that they didn't look strange. There was a bit of energy left, and all we had to do was work hard. After teaching these newly appointed military commanders, Liu Heng instructed them to hand over this action to his own team. After learning to stand at attention in the morning, I started practicing kicking forward again in the afternoon. For the next few days, all the refugee teams repeatedly practiced the 2 movements of standing at attention and walking in unison. It can be said that except for eating and sleeping, all the remaining time was used for these refugees to train these 2 movements. As a bandit, the least valuable thing is life. Liu Heng asked people to prepare a whip made of willow twigs, and anyone who was lazy would be whipped with a whip. The whip is on the side, and the refugees dare not slack off. They learn at a very fast pace, even for foolish people, they firmly remember the essentials of their movements after a few lashes of the whip. The news of Liu Heng training refugees quickly spread throughout the various camps of the entire rebel army. Chapter 7. Going out to get grain. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The place where Liu Heng trained the refugees was only 1 mile away from the rear camp. On the first day of refugee training, all the refugees in the rear camp knew that Liu Heng was training with a group of refugees. Upon hearing this news, Ma Laojue in the rear camp was filled with indignation. He understood that all the food he had accumulated had been taken away by Liu Heng and given to the refugees. At first, he was humiliated in front of everyone, and then his food was taken away. Ma Laojue dared not show any signs on his face, but he wished Liu Heng would die in his heart. When he learned that Liu Heng was recruiting hundreds of refugees, he immediately informed Jing Deqiu, who had a grudge against Liu Heng, hoping to use Jing Deqiu's hand to deal with him. Jing Deqiu, who had just learned the news, was shocked in his heart. He knew that Liu Heng and Li Shuheng from the archer camp both came from the military and were fully capable of training new refugees. If these refugees were trained, they would be hundreds of powerful bandits, and even the central military camp did not have so many infantry. Upon learning the news, Jing Deqiu dared not delay and hurriedly arrived at the main tent of the central military camp, informing the large cabinet Shi Yunhu who was stationed there. Upon hearing this news, Shi Yunhu burst out laughing and said nonchalantly, "Yunjiu, you come from the military. Explain it to him." Ma Yunjiu, who stood at the bottom, stood up and said, "If you want to train soldiers, the first thing you need to do is to fill your stomach. 300 people need at least 1 stone of food per day, even if you save it, it will take 7 or 8 bushels. Nowadays, all the camps are severely short of food. Even if Liu Heng has the support of the archer camp behind him, they can only last for half a month at most. After half a month, they will have no food, and a team trained for less than half a month will only be a mess, and there may even be a camp change." "I understand now." Shi Yunhu, with his chest open and shoulders bare, looked at Jing Deqiu. "I understand now," Jing Deqiu cautiously replied, then anxiously said, "I'm worried that they won't wait for half a month before sending those refugees to various places to grab food." "Haha, that's even more impossible," Shi Yunhu laughed. "Even if Qi Shui and Li Dashai were to come back to life, a group of mud-legged people wouldn't be able to train into an army in 10 days and a half months." Jing Deqiu said humbly, "I'm worried that Liu Heng might grow branches out of nowhere and take over the head of the rear camp. He doesn't have the same heart as you, but instead gets along well with the people from the left and right camps." Otherwise, Wu blind and the others wouldn't speak for him. Shi Yinhu's face sank and he said in a cold voice, "Tomorrow I will have Yunjiu take his cavalry with you to get food. No one can take the position of the rear camp leader." After speaking, he picked up the wine bowl on the low table and drank it all in one gulp. "Thank you very much, big cabinet." Zheng Deqiu quickly knelt down, the little concern in his heart completely disappeared. With Ma Yunjiu's horse team, he believed that no one could snatch the head of his rear camp. Without any worries, Zheng Deqiu simply refused to return to the rear camp. Now that there are hundreds of refugees under Liu Heng's command, he is worried that if he goes to the rear camp, he will fall into Liu Heng's hands. In the next few days, he went out to plunder with Jack Ma every day and rested directly at the camp of the central military camp at night. Zheng Deqiu did not return to the rear camp and became anxious to stay in the rear camp to inquire about the news for Ma Laoming. As time passed day by day, the 300 refugees recruited by Liu Heng had already formed a formation, and in 9 days, they had been trained from scattered sand to the appearance that a military unit should have. Moreover, it is much neater and more imposing than ordinary military personnel, and the horn loudly shouted by the refugee team from time to time has a somewhat strong military appearance. If it weren't for many people witnessing the growth of this group of refugees with their own eyes, probably no one wouldn't believe that these people were just a group of refugees who didn't understand anything a few days ago. And Ma Laoji, who had been secretly following this refugee team, saw the changes in this team day by day. The more he looked at it, the more he was shocked. He admired Liu Heng's methods of training, but the more he did this, the stronger his hatred towards Liu Heng. At the same time, he became more worried that Zheng Deqiu could do nothing about Liu Heng. He wanted to tell Zheng Deqiu about the hundreds of refugees under Liu Heng, but he had no chance to see Zheng Deqiu. During the day, Zheng Deqiu was not at the camp, and at night he dared not leave the camp, afraid of being discovered by Liu Heng's people. As for the other leaders of the central military camp, he is not even qualified to meet as a cook in the rear camp, and they will not see him either. Finally, on the 10th day, he found an opportunity. On this day, Liu Heng and his group of refugees left the camp before dawn. Not only that, but the people and horses of the archer camp also left the camp under the leadership of Li Shuheng. Ma Laoming finally found an opportunity and walked out of the middle military camp in the dark. The eastern sky shone with a white light, like a pale fish belly. Ma Laoqi waited outside the central military camp, finally waiting for Zheng Deqiu. "Zheng Tu, something's wrong." As soon as we met, Ma Laoji said urgently, "Lu Damu left the camp with those refugees before dawn." Not only them, but also the people of the archer camp left the camp together. Zheng Deqiu frowned and asked, "Do you know where to go?" Ma Laoji shook his head and said, "I'm not sure exactly where to go, but they went in the direction of Zheng family village." "Is it possible that they're going to attack Zheng family village?" At this moment, Ma Yunjiu smiled and said, "Don't worry, Yu reading www.yuukangshu.net. Zheng family village is not that easy to fight. It's a famous big village within a radius of more than 10 miles. Upon hearing these words, Zheng Deqiu turned to look at Ma Laoming and said, "Did you hear that? It's a big village within a radius of more than 10 miles, and Zhuangding has raised quite a few. It's just a daydream for Liu Heng, a few hundred refugees, and 100 or so archers from the archer camp to want to capture Zheng's village. But those hundreds of refugees are no longer the same as before, now." Before he could finish speaking, Zheng Deqiu impatiently interrupted, "You think it's so easy to train soldiers? Even if Qi Shui were to revive, with the virtue of those hundreds of muddy legs, he wouldn't be able to develop anything in 10 days and a half months. All right, don't get in the way. Today, Ma Tu-ling and I will go to a further village to plunder. Move aside." As the words fell, he walked directly past Ma Laoming. Ma Laoji wanted to say a few more words, but Zheng Deqiu didn't give him the opportunity and let his bandits drive Ma Laoji away. After Zheng Deqiu and Ma Yunjiu's team left, Ma Lao limped back to the rear camp. After dawn, the two campsites of the left and right camps received reports that the archer camp had all left the campsite. As soon as he received the news, Wu Blind jumped up from the bed and exclaimed excitedly, "I've been preparing for so long, finally waiting for the people and horses of the archer camp to leave." Immediately, he called out a bandit from outside the tent and ordered, "Go and notify the head of the right camp, Zhou Heilian, to come to my place immediately with the right camp people." The bandits from the left camp left the main camp to deliver letters to the right camp. Wu Blind laughed coldly and said, "Sure Yunhu, I'll see who can save you once." In the past about half an hour, Wu Blind and Zhou Black-Faced left the camp with the two gathered bandits and headed straight for Shi Yunhu's Chinese army headquarters. Chapter 8. There are bandits outside the village. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Jing Family Village is one of the few large villages within a radius of more than 10 miles. There is one's own village guards in the village, and there is an old man surnamed Jing living inside. This person had a family of Jurchen ancestors who developed over several decades and 2 generations. Nowadays, the fields in the Jing family's village have become the fields of this Jing master's family, and the farmers in the village are also his Jing master's tenant farmers. There is a slender forest less than 3 miles away from the west side of Zhengjiazhuang, and there is a big river nearby. When it is hot, the forest is particularly cool inside. The people of the archer camp first arrived at this forest and drove away some tenants from Zhengjiazhuang who came to chop firewood, occupying this forest. Shortly thereafter, Liu Heng swaggered into the forest with hundreds of newly trained soldiers he had trained. Not long after, he secretly retreated from the forest with someone, took a long detour, and then swaggered down the main road at the entrance of Zhengjiazhuang to re-enter the forest. After walking this way a few times, it wasn't until the sunset was like blood, and the western sky was red and bright that it stopped. A wave of bandits passed by outside the Zhengjiazhuang village, and the village was already in a state of panic. The people in Zhuangzi know that there are many bandits outside Zhuangzi, all hiding in the forest to the west of Zhuangzi. Zhuangding's son Xiaohu arrived at Mr. Zheng's study with an uneasy expression. Compared to the hot outside, the study is cool and comfortable. 6 or 7 copper pots were placed separately in the study, and the ice inside was slowly melting, constantly emitting a cool air, bringing down the temperature in the room. Sitting in the front seat was a middle-aged man with an open chest, holding a covered bowl in his hand, and standing on either side with a maid holding a fan slowly moving. A little further away stood the butler Shifu. "Master," Xiaohu bowed to the elderly man who was looking up as soon as he entered the room. "Xiaohu." Grandpa Zheng put down the bowl in his hand and asked, "What's up with you rushing over here?" "Steward, go and close the door. After all, some cool air has dissipated from the house." Steward Shi, with 2 beards hanging under his nose, walked towards the door and closed the door to his study. Xiaohu said with a worried expression, "Report to the master that there are many people hidden in the forest west of our Jing family village." According to the villager who has been to that forest in the village, there is a group of bandits living inside, with a population of over 1,000 people. Jokes, my Jing family's village has hundreds of people and is surrounded by walls, making it easy to defend but difficult to attack. If the bandits dare to come, they will seek death. Mr. Zheng said nonchalantly, "It's just that the weather is too hot. Those lowly people who have escaped from the bandits want to hide in the woods and take a break, so don't worry." Steward Shi, who had closed the door and returned, stood aside and said, "Master, we still need to be careful. Recently, a group of bandits have been entrenched in our county and recently attacked Wangjiazhuang, which is 30 miles away from us." "Don't worry," Grandpa Zheng waved his hand and said, "It's just a group of lowly people who have followed the thieves. The Wangjiazhuang has not been broken by them, but rather by this group of bandits who have suffered losses. Similarly, my Zhengjiazhuang is not so easy to deal with." "Alright, Xiaohu, there's nothing wrong. Go down and inspect the village, don't let those tenants be lazy." Xiaohu had no choice but to leave the study. Liu Heng in the forest watched as the sky gradually darkened. He said, "It's almost time. Brother Shuhan, I'll take someone out first. You wait for my signal in the forest and be ready to light the torch at any time." Li Shuhan smiled and assured, "Don't worry, I guarantee that our people will lift torches throughout this forest." Liu Heng nodded and walked out of the forest with his trained 300 new refugees. 300 newly recruited refugees formed a three-line formation, each holding a wooden spear and standing by their side. The whole team was silent, as if a birch tree was standing tall and straight on the ground, as if it were a rock standing proudly on the ground, with a heavy sense of oppression. "Ask the person in charge of your estate to come out and speak." Liu Heng shouted in the direction of Jing family village. He, who had not received a response for a long time, let the 300 people behind him shout together. "The person in charge of Zhuangzi comes out to speak." 300 people roared in unison, their voices ringing and moving. The floating clouds above seemed to have been shattered, and a last ray of sunset took the opportunity to fall. The doors of every household in Zhengjiazhuang were tightly closed, and there was no one on the street. Zhuangding was arranged by Xiao Hu to go to several courtyards on the west side of the village. Some Zhuangding, holding bows and arrows, lay behind the courtyard wall, staring out at the village, while some Zhuangding crouched behind the wall with knives and guns. Many tenant farmers in Zhengjiazhuang hold agricultural tools such as manure forks and carrying poles, guarding their yards with a look of sacrificial expression, but their bodies tremble like chaff. Mr. Zheng in the Zheng family's village learned that the bandits were really attacking the village, and the whole family had already been in chaos. Mr. Zheng in the study no longer had the same ease as before. He sat slumped on the grand tutor's chair, his hand holding the bowl trembling incessantly. A lot of tea was shaken out from inside, and his sleeves were soaked. "Well, these bandits, they dare no matter what." Mr. Zheng trembled and couldn't even complete his sentence. "Steward," she advised on the side, "Master, it's better to take some silver and distribute it to motivate the villagers and tenant farmers to fight against bandits and guard the Zheng family village." "Nonsense." Grandpa Zheng shook his hands and shouted, "Grandpa, I spend money raising hundreds of villagers. Now is the time for them to work hard. Go tell those villagers that if bandits invade the village, Grandpa will never give them another copper coin in the future, and those tenants will also pay an extra rent." Steward Shi's face turned bitter, and she didn't continue to persuade her. She knew that her master valued wealth as his life, and even a copper coin wished it could be broken into two halves. "The bandits have attacked Zhuangzi, the bandits have attacked Zhuangzi." At this moment, cries of bandits attacking Zhuangzi came from the village one after another. Mr. Zheng, who had just stabilized his seat, heard the shout and his face turned pale with fear. He stuttered and shouted, "Quick, take me to hide." "Steward," she said speechlessly, "Master, once the village is destroyed, any hidden place will be found. Why not take advantage of those bandits not surrounding the village and arrange a few village servants to protect the master? You can escape to the county town and be safe there." Yu reading www.uukangshu.net. "No way." Grandpa Zheng shook his head and said, "As soon as I leave, won't these things at home be cheap for those bandits? If I don't leave, I'll stay at home." Seeing that his master had decided to stay for this fleeting wealth, Steward Shi had to say, "Master, I'll go to Xiao Hu's place first to see if I can withstand this group of bandits and rely on Xiao Zhuangtou." "That's right." Grandpa Zheng said urgently, "Tell Xiao Hu that I must guard the village for Grandpa." Steward Shi nodded and left the study. As soon as he walked outside the small courtyard where the study was located, he met Xiao Hu. "As soon as we met," Xiao Hu anxiously said, "Steward Shi, I was just looking for you. Now that the bandits outside the village are preparing to attack the village, according to my observation, there should still be many bandits hidden in the forest. To resist so many bandits, I'm afraid we need to have all the tenant farmers in the village stand up against the bandits. It would be best if Mr. Zheng could offer a sum of money to motivate everyone, so that we have a greater chance of guarding the village." So could you please tell the master and take out some money to motivate the villagers and tenant farmers? Steward She shook his head and said, don't think about the silver. I just mentioned it to the master that he doesn't want to take out a copper coin, let alone distribute a large amount of silver. Sigh. Xiao Hu sighed and said, then I'll try my best to lead people to guard the entrance of the village. If it really doesn't work, Steward She, you can tell the master to escape. I think this group of bandits is very different. They are well organized, with orders and prohibitions, and they look like border troops. It's difficult to guard the village with just a few people in the village. We still need to try our best to hold on, said Butler Shi. If we really can't hold on, you can withdraw early and take a few village guards to escape to the county town. That's all I can do. Xiao Hu nodded. Chapter 9. Money is not life. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hundreds of spears stood facing the sky, and a team of 300 people stood proudly and motionless in 2 rows, making those who saw them feel dizzy and overwhelmed by a mountain, making it difficult to breathe. Xiao Tu. Zhuang Ding saw Xiao Hu and quickly called out. Xiao Hu walked a few steps behind a courtyard wall on the west side and asked in a low voice, how is the situation with the bandits outside? There is currently no attack, said Zhuang Ding. The group of bandits outside are probably not pretending to be from the border army. Such a heavily fortified team is rare in the border army, and we, Zhuangzi, may not be able to hold on anymore. Xiao Hu lay on the edge of the wall and glanced out. Under the afterglow of the setting sun, a long line of bandits stood in an orderly manner, spears like a forest, and the entire team remained motionless like a mountain, which was intimidating. Xiao Hu slowly withdrew his head behind the courtyard wall and cursed softly, damn it, when did the bandits become so strong? Those who don't know think it's the official army. Zhuang Ding said urgently, Xiao Tu, you have an idea. With just us people and those tenant farmers who only know how to play with hoes, we can't stop the bandits outside. What kind of ideas can I have? Xiao Hu scolded angrily and said, wait for those bandits to attack. If they can't stop us, we'll run away. Our brothers can't bury that old man Zheng. At this moment, Liu Heng walked up to the front of 300 newly recruited refugees and stood 1 arrow away from Zheng Jiazhuang. Archer. With Liu Heng's shouts, more than 50 archers quickly ran out from the direction of the forest and arrived at the front of the battle line of hundreds of new refugees. They knelt on one knee on the ground, pulled open the bowstring, and aimed their arrows in the direction of Zheng Jiazhuang. The appearance of the archer startled Xiao Hu, who was lying behind the courtyard wall. There are only a dozen or so archers in Zheng Jiazhuang, but there are more than 50 bandits outside. He had also stayed in the border army before. Whether the people outside the village were real archers who could tell with just a pull of the bowstring, although the distance was a bit far, he could still vaguely see that the long bows in the hands of the bandits were mostly military standard long bows. After recognizing these things, he became more and more certain that this group of bandits was extraordinary. If it weren't for their tattered clothes, he almost thought that the people outside the village were not bandits at all, but the elite of the border army. Listen carefully to the people in Zhuangzi, Liu Heng shouted towards the Zheng family village, we are here to seek wealth. Grain and silver are all good. As long as we gather enough money to buy lives, my people will leave immediately and will not disturb the expensive land. If not, we will leave the Zheng family village without leaving any chickens or dogs. Liu Heng raised his right hand. Kill. 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 300 new refugees and soldiers behind him shouted in unison. At the same time, torches lit up one by one in the forest further behind, and a long dragon appeared in the forest. The tree shadows were graceful, and there were mixed figures in the middle of the forest. A torch was only ignited after 7 or 8 steps. From the direction of Zheng Jiazhuang, it seemed that the forest was densely packed with people. Xiao Hu, who was lying behind the courtyard wall, was so scared that he fell and sat on the ground. He murmured to himself, that's it, Zheng family village is over, there are so many bandits. Zhuang Ding, who was holding a bow beside him, trembled and said, Xiao, Xiao, that group of bandits said they came to seek wealth. Did they tell the master to spend money to alleviate the disaster? No one is willing to fight against the bandits. If we fight, we will die. There are few enemies outside the village, and we cannot see victory at all. Yes, yes, spend money to alleviate the disaster. Xiao Hu patted his thigh and said, you guys stay here watching, I'll go see the master. He got up and strode towards Mr. Zheng's mansion. The sound of shouting and killing just now filled the entire village. Mr. Zheng, who was sitting in the study, quickly asked housekeeper Shi to come out and inquire about the situation. Steward Shi, who had just walked out of the courtyard, saw Xiao Hu walking towards him and hurriedly walked over. What's the situation with those bandits outside the village? Have they already attacked the village? Is there anything else? Xiao Hu shook his head and then asked, where's the master? In the study, butler Shi pointed back to the direction of the study in the courtyard behind her. Xiao Hu walked straight towards the study without saying a word, with manager Shi closely following behind. Pushing open the door of the study, the two of them saw plump buttocks peeking out under the Grand Tutor's chair facing the door, pouting and diving under the chair. The sound of the study door opening made Mr. Zheng, who was under the chair, even more panicked. He crawled straight inside and cried, don't kill me, don't kill me. Xiao Hu and Steward Shi exchanged a glance, and Steward Shi quickly stepped forward, pulling Mr. Zheng out of the chair and saying, don't be afraid, it's me and Xiao Zhuangtou. Mr. Zheng turned his head and opened his eyes to sneak a glance, only to find that it was indeed Steward Shi. The other person standing in front of the door was Xiao Hu, and he breathed a sigh of relief. With the help of Steward Shi, he slowly climbed out of the Grand Tutor's chair and flipped over to sit on the ground. Xiao Hu, have those bandits been beaten away by our Zhuang Ding? Steward Shi helped Mr. Zheng stand up from the side and sat on the Grand Tutor's chair. Xiao Hu's face showed a bitter expression and said, Master, those bandits are still outside the village. A young man led by us asked us to prepare silver and food for them, so that they can withdraw voluntarily. After hesitating for a moment, Xiao Hu added, Master, that group of bandits outside are likely disguised as border soldiers. The bows used by the archers are all standard long bows in the military, and there will be no less than 1,000 people coming. These damn Qiu Ba dare to have the idea of Zheng family village. Damn it, they should all be killed. Grandpa Zheng gritted his teeth and cursed loudly, Butler Shi has prepared paper and ink for me. I want to write a letter to my virtuous son. Law in Tianqingwei and ask him to inquire about which group of Qiu Ba impersonates bandits to come and plunder Zheng family village. The nearby Butler Shi advised, Master, calm down. We can't quench our thirst from afar. The bandits are surrounding our village now, and with Xiao Zhuangtou's manpower, we may not be able to stop them. Do you think we should agree to the demands of the bandits first and treat them as spending money to alleviate the disaster? Well, mention the silver. Mr. Zheng furrowed his brow and hesitated for a while before saying, 50. No, is 100 taels enough? Upon hearing these words, Xiao Hu's face turned black. They mobilized over 1,000 people, but how could they retreat for 100 taels of silver? Even if it were gold, it wouldn't be enough. Sir, 100 taels may not be enough, why don't you add more, said Butler Shi on the side, 150 taels. Mr. Zheng hesitated and looked at Butler Shi, then at Xiao Hu. Seeing that neither of them spoke, he gritted his teeth and said, 200 taels, at most, there's no more eldest son. Upon seeing this, Steward Shi advised, Master, please calm down, calm down. Xiao Hu also knew that taking out 200 taels of silver was the limit of Master Zheng, so he said, Master, those bandits say that food is also good. It's better to give them more food. Grain. Mr. Zheng frowned and hesitated. Steward Shi took the opportunity to say, Master, we still have the old grain from the past 2 years in our granary. I think those bandits are also used to being poor, so getting the old grain will satisfy us. But Chen Liang is also silver. Mr. Zheng couldn't bear to part with it. Steward, she said again, Master, you forgot. 2 months ago, we had already cleared up a batch of rotten grain. Some of the grain in the granary would spoil if we put it back. It's better to give it to those bandits and let them withdraw. Mr. Zheng hesitated for a while sitting on the Grand Tutor's chair, and said with a painful expression on his face, then I'll listen to you. Exchange Chen Liang for the chaotic bandits and retreat, but don't you give me less silver. That's 200 taels. Steward, she's face turned black, and she said to herself, when has it been? I still feel sorry for that little silver. However, he still said, Master, please rest assured. Let's try to take as little silver as possible and give more aged grain. Then I'll leave the matter to you. Make sure to let those bandits retreat, said Mr. Zheng as he covered his chest. Oh my chest hurts so much, my silver, my food. Steward Shi and Xiao Hu looked at each other helplessly and left the study together. Chapter 10. Grain arrived. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. All the heroes outside of Zhuangzi, I am Steward Shi next to Lord Zheng, she shouted loudly as she lay against the wall. Our master asked me to discuss the matter of withdrawing troops with all the heroes. When Liu Heng saw that the people from Zheng family village were coming to negotiate, he stood in front of 300 refugees and slightly curled his lips, shouting, take out the food and silver, and we'll retreat. If we don't, look at the people behind me and in the forest. As soon as I give the order, they will immediately attack Zheng family village and kill you all. Steward Shi, who was standing by the wall, carefully glanced towards the direction of the forest. A long torch shone down, and shadows were faintly visible, causing her neck to shrink in fear. After a while, his head cautiously peeked out from behind the wall and he shouted, don't be angry, hero. Everything is easy to discuss. I wonder how much silver does hero need to withdraw? 3,000 taels. Upon hearing this number, Butler Shi took a cold breath. The owner is only willing to offer 200 taels of silver at most, not even a penny. Housekeeper, she helplessly shouted behind the wall, Master, we really can't get out so much silver. Can we use something else to replace it? Although Mr. Zheng from Zhengjiazhuang is a wealthy family with a radius of more than 10 miles, he is ultimately just a wealthy man. His family only has 4,000 to 5,000 silver coins, which has been accumulated by 2 generations for decades. Including the land deed, the maximum amount of family property is only 10,000 to 20,000 yuan. What do you want to replace it with? Liu Heng replied. Grain, said Butler Shi, the silver cannot be taken out. Can it all be converted into grain? After hesitating for a moment, Liu Heng said, okay, then use grain to offset it. His main purpose of coming to Zhengjiazhuang this time was for food, and silver came in second place. Especially with the identity of other bandits, it was destined that having silver would not be convenient for him to buy food. Even if he could buy food, it would still be at a high price. Instead, it would be better to directly obtain the food for peace of mind. Wait a moment, hero. I will arrange for someone to send the grain to the outside of the village. Butler Shi asked anxiously, hero, should we take out the grain and you withdraw? That's natural, Liu Heng readily agreed. This time, the main purpose of his visit was for food. He brought only over 400 people, and the 300 people behind him were all new refugees who had only been trained for 10 days. They were all ordinary people, and he had no confidence in attacking the Zheng family village. It would be better to take advantage of the fact that all the people in the Zheng family village were being intimidated and stop. The butler Shi on the courtyard wall was helped down from the table under his feet, and Xiao Hu beside him said, do you really give them food worth 3,000 taels of silver? How could there be so much grain for them in Zhuangzi? Steward, she said, there is still a lot of sorghum and soybeans left. When the time comes, we will use these to make a portion of the grain, and let every tenant farmer in Zhuangzi contribute a portion of the remaining grain. Giving some grain to the rebels' retreat is also to protect their lives. Xiaohu said anxiously, what if we give them food and those bandits break the agreement and refuse to retreat? Steward Shi sighed and said, we can only hope that the bandits will voluntarily withdraw after receiving food. Otherwise, not only will the food be theirs, but our lives will also be theirs. After speaking, Steward Shi turned around and left, taking the Jing family's servants to prepare food. In the past about half an hour, carts of grain were transported out of Zhengjiazhuang. Due to the abundance of grain, all the carts were pulled by livestock, and the coachman sat in front of them, filling the carts with bags of grain. Yang Yuan and a few people went over to inspect and confirm that it was all grain, then nodded at Liu Heng. Liu Heng had a plan in his heart and estimated that the grain transport truck had transported over 1,000 stones of grain. Suddenly, he said, the truck and the livestock are left behind, and the coachman and the grain transport personnel are all returning to Zhuangzi. Accompanying the grain transport truck was a laborer next to Butler Shi, who was specifically responsible for this grain transport. When Liu Heng asked Jing Zhezhuang to keep the cart and livestock, he quickly ran over and nodded to Liu Heng with a smile, saying, General, the grain has not been transported yet, and the cart and livestock need to go back to the village to transport the grain. Liu Heng raised his eyebrows and grabbed the handle of the knife with one hand, coldly saying, either go back to Zhuangzi, or you don't have to go back anymore. I'll go back now. The servant didn't understand Liu Heng's meaning, and if he stayed any longer, his life would be gone. He immediately took the coachman and the grain carrier and ran all the way to Zhuangzi. After the last person entered Zhuangzi, Liu Heng turned around and said to the 300 new refugees behind him, 3 teams go to transport grain, and the rest of the people guard the grain trucks. Return to the camp. A team of several hundred people was escorting a grain truck slowly moving. As it passed through the forest to the west, another team of people and horses merged with the grain transport team and finally disappeared into the sight of Zhengjiazhuang. Steward Shi and Xiao, who both lay on the courtyard wall, watching the bandits outside the village leave, and breathed a sigh of relief. After a while, Steward Shi suddenly frowned and said, no, it's not right. This group of bandits only managed to take away over 1,000 stones of grain and then retreat. Xiao, who beside him, said indifferently, it's not good for bandits to take less food. Our brothers can also share more profits with us. It's still not right. Steward Shi pointed to the forest on the west side and said, the bandits outside Zhuangzi have retreated, but look at the forest over there, the torch is still lit and there seems to be people inside. Isn't it that the bandits haven't retreated yet? Speaking of this, Xiao, who suddenly frowned and called for someone to come over, instructing, Lizi, take a few people to touch the forest to the west in the dark and see if there are anyone inside, how many people are there. But in case the bandits haven't yet. Before the leprosy could finish speaking, the butler, she said, here's 50 taels of silver for you. There's only one requirement. To confirm whether there's anyone in the forest. You can't just retreat and report when you see some swaying shadows. You must hear someone talking or see someone in the forest. Remember, you can't retreat when you see shadows, you must see real people. The person named Lizi's eyes lit up, and Yu read a book www.yuukangshu.net and immediately joked, don't worry, butler. I'll go now, but that's silver. When speaking, he never forgets to twirl his fingers. This is 20 taels, the remaining 30 taels will be given to you when I come back. Steward, she threw 2 taels of 10 taels of silver to him. The leprosy carefully took the palm of his hand, put it into his sleeve, and shouted for 2 people to leave Zhuangzi with him. In less than half an hour, the leprosy ran back panting heavily and said, no one, everyone has left. There are only torches left in the forest. It's broken, we've been deceived. Butler, she patted her thigh and immediately said, Xiao Zhuangtou, you should take someone to chase after us immediately and make sure to intercept the grain. Xiao Hu shook his head and said, we can't pursue them. Why don't we just treat them as a group of more than 1,000 bandits? Don't forget, there is a group of 2,000 or so bandits lurking in our county. Who knows if this group of people has any connection with those bandits? The nearby butler she quickly reacted and nodded, saying, this group of bandits must be the group of bandits entrenched within the territory. There are also over 2,000 bandits who are attacking Jing family village this time. Xiao Hu turned around and said to the people around him, you all remember. Before, all the words of the leprosy were rotten in my stomach. Then everyone will have the benefit of 10 taels of silver. Remember. Remember. As soon as they heard that they could earn 10 taels of silver, everyone shouted excitedly in unison. Steward, she whispered to Xiao Hu, you go take someone to keep an eye on the remaining grain, and I will arrange for them to be shipped out and sold as soon as possible. Not to mention the excess, it's still possible to share a few hundred taels per person. Liu Heng naturally had no idea what happened in Zhengjiazhuang after he left, but on his way back to the camp of the bandits, another battle that occurred in the camp had also ended.